Hello and welcome. This is Dr. Matthew Rasmussen, and I haven't made a video in quite some time, so I figured now would be an amazing opportunity. This amazing opportunity has been given to me by a student, actually. She had, for her psychology project, she had created a nearly completely anatomically correct brain that looks extremely realistic, and one of the coolest things about this guy here is it's completely edible, so it's wonderful. Now, so I figured that this would give me a great opportunity to kind of point out some interesting facts about the brain. So let me just show you something here. What we're looking at here is we're looking at the left hemisphere. It's over on the left side, obviously, and the right hemisphere. So the left and the right, okay, just to give everyone an idea. This is the frontal portion, this is the rear portion, okay? Now, also on a brain, there is 4 separate lobes. Now, the first lobe consists of primarily this region here, which is the frontal lobe. Okay? The frontal lobe. Now you also have the parietal lobe, and the parietal lobe essentially extends from about here on the left hemisphere, and then about here to a little bit rear on the right hemisphere. Okay, and that's the parietal lobe. In the back of the brain, which you really can't see, that is the occipital lobe, right? Both on the left and the right hemisphere. And then lastly, what you can't see at all would be underneath the brain, where basically I'm pointing to, that's the temporal lobe. Okay, so we have the frontal, the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe, and the temporal lobe. On the brain, you see how it's so convoluted? Well, as I went over in a prior video, those are a bunch of folds and ridges. The folds, the puffy part, those are called gyri, multiple. One is a gyrus, the one that I'm touching right here. Okay? Now let me use my pointer, I can point more specifically. So this is a gyrus. Here's a gyrus as well. You can see that. See that as well. Okay? That's the puffy region. Now you have the sunken region in between 2 gyri. That's a sulcus. Right? It's just a small sunken little area to help extend and increase the surface area. Now the last portion I want to show you is this portion right in between the brain. Okay, that we can see very easily here. The brain actually has many of these. This is called a fissure, and a fissure is a very, very deep sulci. This is called the longitudinal fissure. It separates the left hemisphere from the right hemisphere. But as you may recall, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere are not completely separate. They are connected via a single tissue. Now, it's not just one tissue, it's a band of neural fibers. Okay, these bands of neural fibers extend from the left and go to the right, and extend from the right and go to the left. It's essentially how the brain communicates to either hemisphere. And that structure is called the corpus callosum. And we're going to take a look at that in more detail right now. So, you may remember that I talked about an individual who may have had a seizure disorder, which used to be formerly called epilepsy, where it would be overactivation in one location. Okay? And this is essentially an individual is having too much neural activation. And what happens to that too much neural activation? It could be out here on the cortex, could be deep inside the brain, so I can just basically poke my finger deep inside of the brain, and it could be too much neural activation, and that would result in a seizure. Okay? Now that can spread to the right hemisphere, other parts of the right hemisphere. However, if the left and the right brain are connected, that overactivation can start in the right hemisphere and then transfer over to the left hemisphere and essentially accumulate and engulf the entire left hemisphere as well as the right hemisphere. So, to make a long story short, how do doctors quell this? How did doctors in the past quell this? Well, what they would do is they would take a knife and they would cut the corpus callosum, and the corpus callosum would be severed, thus allowing an individual to not have a seizure that starts on the right side of the brain travel over to the left side of the brain. Okay? Now again, that cutting of the corpus callosum starts essentially in this region here. Let me do it one more time to get good measure. As you can see, some of the neural tissue is still sticking to the knife. Now, I'm sure that doctors were a little bit more precise about this, but in general, this is what it looked like, okay? Severing the left from the right. That, my friends, is a corpus calostomy. Corpus calostomy is the severing of the corpus callosum. So now that the corpus callosum has been severed, now we can actually look and see what is inside of the brain. And how we're going to do that, we're actually going to perform a prefrontal lobotomy. Many of the lobotomies that were performed essentially didn't even remove the left and the right hemisphere. They just destroyed some of the connections between the left and the right hemisphere. But we're going to perform a complete lobotomy, and that will be the removal of a structure, and this will be some of the frontal cortex. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my knife, and I'm going to be very specific again. I'm going to go in between those two gyri, and just performing a nice even movement, going all the way down. Now I need the most specific tool that a neurosurgeon can use. That is a spatula, thus removing big portion of the frontal cortex. And what we can see is inside we have, just as I suspected, a wonderful region, a little bit thicker than in reality. This is the cerebral cortex, the outer bark. In reality, that's only 3 millimeters in depth. Here, it looks more like nearly an inch. But underneath there, which is perfect, we have the white matter, okay? The white matter. The gray matter and the white matter. Remember, the gray matter is primarily neural tissue, which is neurons itself. Here, again, it's neural tissue, but it's the actual axons that run from the gray matter to other structures, both within the brain and then to the corpus callosum, which is on in the middle of the left hemisphere and the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. So this is a perfect demonstration. You can actually see the sulci here. See how the sulci come down, and then here's a gyrus. So here's a gyrus, a sulci, another gyrus, and a sulcus. So this is a perfect little representation of the inside of the brain. Now, in fact, just to do one more thing here, just to give this individual some dedication. This is all completely edible, and this is cake. This seems like some sort of really, really thick frosting. This is a coconut layer, and basically, if you were here, you'd probably love to try it. It looks extremely tasty. I'm going to, in fact, try some right now. Okay? So thanks for tuning in. I really appreciate it. If I could find anything else to do with this, I'll let you know. But otherwise, thanks, and have a great day.